Hi, everyone. And on behalf of everyone here at INSOM, I am delighted to welcome you to session 8 in the INSOM 2019 Fall Webinar Series. This presentation is entitled Demystifying Edition Based Redefinition. My name is Mark Ruel from the INSOM marketing team, and I'll be your moderator. Our series producer is Marc-André Brassard. And now, before we begin, I want you to know that your mics are muted, and we'll be taking your questions in the question panel. And you can also chat in the chat panel. And we'll answer your questions as we progress through the presentation. So put them up as soon as they come to you, and be sure to provide enough context in your question as well. Additionally, there is the possibility that we might go over the 1 hour mark on this particular webinar, and we hope you can stay on with us past the hour, but don't worry if you can't, because our session is recorded and a link to the recording will be sent to you directly by email. Our presenter today is Richard Sohl. Richard Sohl's expertise is enriched by experiences in a variety of business sectors. Starting out in the US Air Force, he then moved on to BMW and then on to higher education establishments. He started building database-backed applications in the late 80s. In all, his career in IT has spanned over 30 years, including just under 15 years at Oracle in roles such as project manager, business development manager, and solutions architect. Conferring him with an intimate knowledge of Oracle products. He's currently the Director of Consulting Services at INSOM, and he also teaches Oracle DBA certification courses at Austin Community College. Richard is also a sought-after speaker at various conferences, such as Kscope, Oracle Open World, and several Oracle user groups. His skills and knowledge have been validated by 7 different Oracle certifications. And now we'll begin the presentation, so I will hand the webinar over to our presenter. Richard, we're ready when you are.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate it. So, demystifying edition-based redefinition. I created this because I had been to many different conferences, and there's been a product manager from Oracle who has presented on edition-based redefinition for a number of years. His name is Bryn Llewellyn, and Bryn and I follow each other on Twitter. And I told Bryn that I was going to do this presentation. And the reason I was really doing it is because Bryn is ludicrously erudite and always uses the right word for everything. And whenever he presents, you're like, hey, wow, this is really interesting. I think this is fascinating, but he never presented it in a way where it felt like it was easy for somebody to get started. And when I told him I was going to do this presentation, he sent me this DM, right, saying that he didn't like the title of my presentation. It implies that there's something mysterious about edition-based redefinition. And he says the point is rather that it's a complete solution for a very challenging problem. You have to understand the problem and some laws of physics before you can appreciate the solution. And I sort of disagree with Bryn on that, right? He continued in his DM and he said, hey, watch these videos. And there is a complete video recording of Bryn, who was one of the product managers who was instrumental in the development of edition-based redefinition. And it was recorded. It is almost 8 hours long. And Bryn goes through edition-based redefinition in excruciating detail. If you do get heavily involved in edition-based redefinition and want to do hot rollovers of production systems, I highly recommend that you spend the time to watch this. But some of us want to do maybe a little bit less with edition-based redefinition, or just get that initial understanding so that you can go back and talk to your teams about what edition-based redefinition is and how it works. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our first poll. And our first poll is, how have you used edition-based redefinition so far? And we've got a couple of choices here. Choice A, I've used edition-based redefinition to do a zero downtime hot rollover on a production server. I've used edition-based redefinition in any other way, or I have not used edition-based redefinition yet. So at this point, the organizers are going to pop up a poll and allow you guys to supply the answers to those questions. And I'm not seeing anything on my side, guys.
Okay, Richard, we're checking in to see if
Okay.
the poll is being put up.
Organizer must hide polls results to enable screen sharing.
Okay, Richard, I have results. To the question, have you used EBR? 9% of those polled respond yes, and 91% respond no.
Awesome. Awesome. That's excellent. That is exactly the information that we were looking for. All right. I'm going to ask another very, very quick question, which is this. Have anybody on this call or on this webinar, have you used Oracle 11.2 or higher? And so I think the poll is open. Organizer must close poll to enable screen sharing.
Yep, don't worry about it, Richard. The poll is open, and we'll give a few moments for everyone to answer. And we have results. To the question, have you used Oracle 11.2 or higher? The poll results are yes, 100%, and of course, no, 0%.
Awesome, awesome. So very interestingly, Edition-Based Redefinition divides the Oracle world into two different epochs. So just like we have BC and AD, in Oracle, we have before Edition-Based Redefinition. And before Edition-Based Redefinition was available, you connected to all of your Oracle databases using 5 facts. Those 5 facts, I think you guys know these 5 facts, right? It's the host name of the server, the port that the listener is running on, the service name that you're going to connect to. If you've been around the Oracle for a very long time, you might also use the SID of the database, but we shouldn't be using those anymore. We should be using service names. And then, of course, the username, and finally, the password. This is how we have connected to Oracle databases from time immemorial. However, in 2009, after Edition-Based Redefinition was introduced, there were 6 facts used to connect to an Oracle database: a host name, a port, a service name, a username, a password, and an edition. Since 11.2, which is 2009, every single database connection that you have made has connected to an edition, and 6 facts are necessary to connect to an Oracle database since 11.2 and since 2009. So every single person here said that they had used an 11.2 database, and therefore they have been using Edition-Based Redefinition because it ships as part of the 11.2 database or higher, and you just didn't necessarily know, right? So we had 91% of the people say they had never used Edition-Based Redefinition before, but 100% of the people said they had used Oracle 11.2 or higher. So next question, have you used EBR? And the answer should be, we've got that poll open there, Mark.
Yep, poll is open. We'll give everyone just a few moments. Results coming in.
Okay.
Survey says yes, 62%, and no, 38%.
Okay, well, guess what? For those 38%, You actually really have used Edition-based redefinition. You just didn't know it. Edition-based redefinition was created to solve some really big problems. So the first problem is downtime. Downtime is extremely painful. Downtime is also very, very expensive. And if you care about data integrity and performance before edition-based redefinition, it was virtually impossible to build systems that would enable patching in real time. Why is downtime so painful? I think you guys know this, right? I've got a customer that I've been working with for a number of years, and they run production and test on a single Oracle database appliance. We had to move that database appliance from one data center to another, and we scheduled a long weekend because Oracle support told us the only supported way to move a database appliance from one data center to another data center was to wipe it down to bare metal and re-image it from scratch. Now, thankfully, I'd taken complete notes on every single change I had ever made to the database appliance, including the setup and installation. So I had all the exact steps to do everything that was needed to be done. We scheduled this over a long weekend, so we took away the server on a Thursday evening after business hours, and Friday was a day off. They picked up the database appliance, brought it over to the new data center, and as they were installing it, a fire went off in the data center, and the sprinklers started going off. There was literally water pouring down the walls. For those of you in the Boston area, you might remember the weekend that this happened because it kind of made the news. And then while I rebuilt the whole entire server once everything was working, the backups had been backed up to Oracle Cloud using an encryption key. And because the server had been re-imaged, the backups wouldn't decompress off of Oracle Cloud. And so I went back and forth with Oracle support. Over that 3 days, I worked over 70 hours trying to get everything back up and running. Eventually got everything back up and running with no data loss through heroic efforts. But it was incredibly painful because while the system is down, nobody can use it. We had committed to the users to have everything up and running by Monday, but there was just no way we could lose any data, or no way that we couldn't have the system available for all the scientists that were going to be using it on Monday morning. So downtime, and I think there are those of us who have been in this situation before, it's so painful because literally you can't stop working. You can't just take a break and say, I'll put this off until tomorrow. How expensive is downtime? And so I'm going to give you some answers. It's either $30,000, $300,000, $3 million, $30 million, or $300 million expensive. Now, of course, the problem is we can't take the poll quite yet because we don't know what the context is. And the context for this is actually this. There is a very, very big rental car company who did analysis on how much money did they lose each year to schedule downtimes for patches and upgrades. And the scenario was this: hey, we want to roll out a new version of our website that's gonna, be greater than the current version that we have. So what we're going to do is on Saturday night, we're going to schedule a couple of hours of downtime, and we'll just, if users go to the website, we'll say, hey, the site is currently down, we're introducing new features, and then we're going to get stuff back up and running for you very soon. The problem with this is, of course, if you really need a rental car for the next day, you might not decide to wait around for the website to come back because you're not sure, is it really going to come back? So what you do is you go off to rental company B, and there the checkout process was a little bit smoother. Everything was great. You liked the car a little bit better. When you returned it, you liked it even better than rental company A. And so what you did is you never came back. And so this company did a lot of analysis, and they figured out how much money they were losing each year to people who didn't come back to their rental car company because they went somewhere else during those downtimes. And so now, knowing the context, how much money do we think this rental car company was losing each year to these customers who didn't come back when their website was down during these migrations?
All right, we'll give a chance for everyone to answer. That doesn't sound like $30,000 if you're talking about a car company, but I won't.
Mark, you're skewing the results.
I have a question for you, Richard.
Yes.
We got it as we were discussing the results of using EBR or not in the beginning. And the question is, well, it's a statement, start with a statement and a question. It's interesting, as we still use a EBR style connections, is the addition default if you only don't supply one, as we never supply one when we connect?
Yes, that is absolutely the case. Every Oracle database since 11.2 has a default addition, and if you don't specify it, you'll automatically connect into that one.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see if we have those results.
All right.
And we do. 0% 30,000, 5% for 300,000, 29% for 3 million, 38% for 30 million, and 29% for 300 million.
Okay, well, wide range there. The actual answer was D. So this rental car company was losing $30 million a year in revenue from scheduled downtime for patches and upgrades to their website. So in the turn of the century, a couple of solutions came about to stop downtimes, these scheduled downtimes for patches and upgrades. Two solutions, Oracle Golden Gate and DataGuard. And effectively, the solution proposal was this. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to have the currently running system. We're going to replicate everything into the next version of the system. We're going to have the current version of our application talking to the current version of our database. And we're going to have the next version of our application talking to the next version of our database. And then we're going to create some processes to do bidirectional replication of the data between the two environments. This way, any of those users that were using that website to say book a car, we didn't have to kick them off. They could finish up their transactions on the old system. And any new users that could come in, they would finish off, or they'd be able to start their transactions on the new system, right? And we wouldn't have to have any downtimes. However, there are issues. So let's do this. You called up somebody and you're talking to a customer service representative and you're going through a whole account creation process. And we're using one of those technologies where we're using bidirectional replication between the two environments to keep the data in sync, right? And one person is talking to a rep who's using the old system and another person is talking to a rep who's using the new system, right? And so now what happens is at some point during the interview, they say, and what would you like your username to be, right? And you say, well, I want my username to be Rich Soul. And the other person on the other system does the same thing, right? So now one of those users is going to commit on one system and then send the transaction over to the other system. And at the same time, the other system does the same thing. And what we end up with is we end up with a conflict, right? Because of course, in our system, there's a unique constraint on the username and two people can't have the same username. But because of the way bidirectional replication works, we effectively commit on the first system, and then we send our commits over to the second system. You're effectively always going to end up in this scenario where you can have conflicts between the two systems. So in the early 2000s, Siebel was out there saying, hey, we're doing zero downtime migrations using Golden Gate, and Oracle eBusiness Suite didn't have that solution. And they actually looked at it and they said, well, no, this isn't really a real solution because you actually have to resolve all of these conflicts. And therefore, it doesn't really do what would need to be done. Some people said, hey, look, we can just solve the zero downtime problem by just hot patching our server and just updating all the rules and the business rules in PL SQL and deploy new PL SQL packages on top of the existing ones while the users are using the system. And sometimes this sort of works, but it doesn't always work. And what you're gonna see is a 4068 Aura error, and this existing state of packages has been discarded. And one can imagine that if this error were propagated up to the end users, they wouldn't have very much faith in that system, right? Oh, I was using this website to book a car, and all of a sudden I saw this existing state of packages has been discarded error, and I have no idea what happened, and then I had to rebuild my entire rental itinerary. That wouldn't be a good user experience. So the Oracle Apps team said, hey, we need to be able to do zero downtime patching of our production systems without these issues coming into play. And so what they did is they put together some functional goals. Those functional goals, you should be able to clone the entire database as the next version of the database in private. You should be able to make changes in the next version with zero impact to the current version. When the next version is ready, you should be able to synchronize all the data, and that should be done constantly. And users that are currently using the current version of the application, they should be able to finish everything that they're doing. New users should be able to connect to the next version. And this is the most important thing at all times. You need to honor all data and business rules in a transactional fashion, right? We're used to this. We're used to if two CRM reps are both trying to create the rich soul user on the same system at the same time, one of them does the insert, right? But they haven't committed yet. And the second person that's trying to create the rich soul user, that user kind of just sees a little bit of a pause. And then depending on what happens with the first user, either they hit cancel and a rollback happens and now the second transaction happens, or they do a commit, in which case the second user gets an error. That's kind of the magic of an Oracle database, right? Or the magic of a transactional database. And we all know and expect this behavior. And we want that same type of behavior in this brave new world. Now, there were some non-functional goals, some kind of nice to haves. They said, hey, creating the next version, instantaneous, should take no time. It should take no space, and it should use no hardware, right? Online users should not notice any loss of performance. So there might be some of you who are sitting there in the back of your head saying, wait a minute, that Golden Gate multi-master replication thing, I could get around that by doing two-phase commits, right? And doing distributed commit transactions. However, we all know in the real world that when you do that, performance tends to become excruciatingly slow compared to a single server. So the implication of our functional and non-functional goals, one database must magically appear as two. Edition-based redefinition makes one database magically appear as two. Building edition-based redefinition into the Oracle database was ludicrously expensive. So remember I mentioned Siebel was doing these zero downtime migrations around the turn of the century, and the Oracle eBusiness Suite team came to the Oracle database team and they said, hey, we want to do this. We know Golden Gate or DataGuard isn't going to be able to deliver this in the way that we want it. We need you to build this functionality into the database for us. And the database team kind of laughed at them and said, yeah, you know, theoretically that's possible, but goodness gracious, we'd have to rewrite a whole bunch of the Oracle database. We'd have to introduce a whole bunch of new functionality. We'd have to do things that we haven't even been thinking about doing, and the project's too big, so the answer is no. Somebody at Oracle said, nope, you're gonna do it. So the database team did it, and they delivered edition-based redefinition in 2009, right? So as I said, we've all been using EBR since 2009, since the 11.2 version of the Oracle database. But remember that it was built to solve this problem. Oracle applications, very, very sophisticated, very, very complicated, should be able to do hot patching and hot upgrades with zero downtime, where users who are in the middle of their existing transactions can finish them out, and users who start new transactions are in the new system and everything works and everything's there. So our goal for this presentation today, since we've all decided that we are already using edition-based redefinition, is to use more edition-based redefinition. Now, I'm going to take a little break and I'm going to show a hot rollover illustration by Brins. So these are his slides, used with permission, obviously, that show the type of scenario that we're talking about. So basically, here we go. We have a database, and we also have that run app. Those run apps, the little boxes there, you can think of those as connections to the database. So we have an application running, and that application has a number of connections to the database. And then we also have this little thing called a traffic director, and we'll kind of see how that works. So a user comes along, and a user says, I'd like to connect to the application, and they do that through the traffic director. The traffic director says, oh, this is the running version of our application, and now they're using the application, right? Those database connections that the application already had, they're connected into the currently running edition of the database. The app is great. All the users, this is our normal pre-upgrade situation. Everybody is connecting into the existing running application. So now it's time to deliver some new functionality, and it's time to do an upgrade of this application. So what do? We create a patch edition. And remember our goals. This has to be instantaneous, take no space, take no time, use no hardware. We do that. Then we deploy a new version of the application that uses the patched edition of the database. Remember, all data synchronized at all times in a transactional fashion. A new user comes along, and the traffic director says, hey, let's do this hot rollover, right? I'm going to connect you to the new version of the application. And so now we have some users using the old version and this one user using the new version. New users come along, they're connected. The old users finish up, and if they attempt to reconnect, the traffic director says, no, new version of the application is ready. That's what you connect to. And now they see, new, better features, more performance. Who knows what we delivered in this patch version of the application. Everybody's disconnected, and now the hot rollover has ended. So everybody is connected into the new version of the application. And we now have normal use. So our new patch edition has become the run edition. And now we have this former run app and the former run edition, and we'll just go ahead and clean those up and take them away. And now we're ready for the next patch version to be introduced at some point in the future. So this was the type of functionality that the eBusiness Suite folks wanted, and in 2009, they got it. Edition Based Redefinition was completed in 2009. It has been a feature for over 10 years now. We're about to hit 11 years, right? What was delivered by the database team? 3 new object types were delivered. The first one is an addition. The second one, an auditioning view. And the third one, a cross-addition trigger. For the remainder of the presentation, we're going to look at each of these and how to use them in a very gradual way. We additionally, behind the scenes, and if you've been around the Oracle world for a long time, you might have remembered all those neato online keywords that were added to all the capabilities, or a lot of the capabilities in the database. So we could rebuild an index online where we couldn't do that in the past, and we could add columns in an online way, and we couldn't do that in the past. That was delivered in 11.2. So most blocking DDL, data definition language, became non-blocking DDL, and there was other blocking DDL, so you can't always get around blocking DDL, but it became timed blocking DDL. So we gave the ability of introducing some DDL that would have some blocks, but we could set a timer on it so that it would eventually time out and allow us to maybe reschedule that operation to a different point in time, maybe when there was less traffic. This is incredibly extensive changes to the kernel of the Oracle database. And by the way, no other database has this capability. The database being as big as it is, and as much stuff changed as was in these EBR delivery, in 2013, Oracle introduced 12.2, and EBR itself became more complete. In 2016, Oracle introduced 12.2, and EBR became even more complete. So we got new EBR features all the way through 2016. If you ask Brin would say that you'd be mad to start an EBR exercise before 12.2. Now, I personally believe that if you're doing any new development of applications, you'd be mad to do any development in before 12.2, because of course 12.2 we got a lot of functionality, but one of the biggest and the best is, of course, no longer are we limited to 30-character object names, so we can name stuff much more appropriately and get rid of weird abbreviations and stuff that makes application development harder. Let's talk about those 3 object types that were introduced. So the first thing that was introduced is the concept of an addition. And really, this should have been called version, right? So you have the currently running version of the database, and you have the patched version of the database. The problem with the word version is we already used version many, many times, right? If we used version for edition-based redefinition, right, instead of addition, and somebody said, I'm connecting to this version of the database. Well, what do you mean? Do you mean the 12.1 version of the database, or the 12.2 version, or et cetera, right? So what they did is they went through a thesaurus and they found, hey, what are synonyms for version? And they just settled on addition. In your head, think of addition as the database itself being able to have multiple versions inside of itself. If we have versions in the database or additions, we actually have objects that can be additionable, or think objects that can have different versions depending on which edition you connect into. This query, select additionable types from $, additionable types, returns different results depending on if you run it at 11.2, 12.1, or 12.2 and higher. This is 12.2 and higher. And normally when I'm doing this presentation, I let people just chime in and I'll ask, does anybody notice in these additionable types one of the properties that all of them share? So we look at views, synonym, procedures, functions, packages in their bodies, triggers, types in their bodies, and libraries and SQL translation profiles. And all of them share a common characteristic. And that common characteristic, every single one of those is just a row in the data dictionary. And they do not require any space allocation. So you might have noticed what was missing from that list, a table. You build a table, it allocates space. An index, same type of thing, right? So these objects that are additionable only are created by adding a new row into the data dictionary. So since 11.2 of the database, every Oracle database has been shipped with a default edition called Aura $base. Personally, I don't like the name Aura $base as the default edition. And one of the first things that I do when I create a database that we're going to be using for edition-based redefinition development is I create a new edition called E0, and it's just, the first default edition. I make that the default edition, and then I retire the Aura $base edition. One of the very important concepts about additions is this. Additions are always linear. You start with one. When you make a new one, it is a child of the previous one. If you make another addition, it is a child of the previous one. So, unfortunately, you will see blog posts out there where people say, hey, maybe at some point in the future, Oracle will allow multiple additions to be the child of the previous edition. That is not going to happen. Edition-based redefinition was built to solve the problem that we saw before. I have my currently running default edition in the database. I create my next edition. In that next edition is where I'm going to build my patched objects. At some point, I'm going to take everybody and migrate them from the previous edition to the next edition, and then I'm going to have one edition again. And then at some point, I'll create another one and go forward from there. So very important to understand, additions are always linear. Now, very, very, very technically, if you had a situation like this where you actually had 3 additions in the database, Aura base was the default, you created E0 and you created E1. By default, users would connect into Aura base. Some developers could be connected into E0 and some could be connected into E1. You could say, I don't like E1, and I could drop it and then create a new E1, or I could drop the Aura base and you could have multiple additions. Just because it is, or excuse me, more than 2 additions, just because it is possible doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. in the same way that it is possible to have a table with a couple thousand columns in it, but one should never do that if you're building at least a transactional system. So this was built so that you have a base, you have a default edition and the next edition. Once everybody's migrated to the next edition, you get rid of whatever the previous default was. One of the reasons people think that you can create that at some point in the future, you might be able to create multiple child editions of an edition is because of the syntax of the create edition command. So I always use the bottom one, create edition E0. But very technically, you can write that same thing as create edition E0 as child of or a $base. There is no choice when you do the as child of clause. It must be the last edition. So you can't actually create E0 as a child of or a base and then create E1 as child of or a base. You'll get an error. So I actually don't use that syntax ever. I always use just create edition with an edition name, and it will always be, quote unquote, the last edition in the line whenever you create one. So to see if we were paying attention, let's have a little poll. How many editions should you have? Either 0 or 1, 1 or 2, 2 or more, or as many as you want.
Richard, we don't have a poll system for that particular question, so I'll let people answer in the question box, and I'll be counting them out by hand.
It's okay. All right. So if you were paying attention, you probably realized the correct answer is C, right? 1 or 2 editions is how many editions you should have. In the same way that you shouldn't be creating transactional tables with thousands of columns in them, right? You really should be using edition-based redefinition in a way where you have the run edition and the next edition, and that's it. You will see blog posts that have examples with 15 different editions. Will it work? Yep, it does. But the feature itself was designed for this model. And is there a point where you will potentially run into some type of issue or some type of bug if you try to have 15 editions simultaneously in your database? Almost definitely, right? So it's kind of up to you if you want to do it or not, but you probably shouldn't. You should only have 2 editions in your database.
And Richard, people were listening, so because 100% of the respondents responded C,
awesome,
1 or 2 editions.
Awesome. Fantastic. So let's do this. So we now have this new edition, right? So we started with the or $base, we created edition E0, and then just as a fun exercise, we just retired or $base. So now E0 is our default edition of the database, right? And we have only 1 edition. We now decide the developers are going to be working on the next version. And so we create version or edition E1 in our database. And now what I want to do is I want to say, hey, remember that list of editionable objects? I would like one of my schemas, or in this case, I have 2 different schemas, an application data and an application logic schema, to be able to use additions. And this is the command that we do, just alter user application data, enable additions, alter user application logic, enable additions. In this case, I'm kind of using a smart DB paradigm. You don't have to do that. You can in addition enable any of your own schemas. When you do this, by the way, this is irreversible. You cannot unenable additions for a schema. Once it's turned on, it can never be turned off. Which schemas can be addition enabled? No Oracle maintained schemas, so just your own schemas, but you can addition public synonyms that you create. And this, by the way, was one of those features that got added in a later release of Edition-Based Redefinition when it became more complete than it was in the first 11.2 implementation. So we have our Edition E1. We've said these schemas should be able to create additionable objects, but to allow them to actually use a particular addition, you grant use to the schema. So grant use on Edition E1 to application data. And now what we've done is we've said, hey, our application data in the currently running database, it looks like this. We created a new edition called E1. The developer is going to be able to connect into that edition. And when they do, anything that they create will have the same name, the same data type, everything the same as the previous edition. But whenever they're running code in the next edition, it will run that code rather than the code that existed before. How do we get to those editions? Two different ways. So the first way is you create a connection to the database. And remember how I said in 11.2 and higher, we have 6 facts. One of the facts that you can create in an 11.2 or higher database service name is which edition would you like to connect to? By default, every service name connects to the default edition, but you can update it and say, hey, when I use this service name, I am going to connect into edition E1. So in the first line there, we're just connecting in. Next edition is just a TNS alias, and it points to a service name. Inside of that service name, I have said, anybody who connects through this service name connects to E1. Or a developer could connect into E0, because that's what everybody connects into by default now. And they can just, within their session, say alter session, set edition, E1. To edition an object, remember all of our object types that we had there from that additionable objects list. What do? Just create or replace the object that as it was before. So previously, we had a business rules package, right? That had a procedure in it that does some cool stuff. Connected to edition E1, I just do a create or replace package body business rules as this, and I put my sweet new version logic in there. And now any user who is connected to the old default edition, E0, they run the old business rule. And anybody who's connected to the new one runs the new business rule. It is literally that simple. One of the visuals that we can use to think about this is if I was standing up on high, looking into a database schema, and it had some tables and some views and some procedures and packages and all those different things in it, right? I could see all of my objects. When I created an edition, it's the equivalent of putting a piece of glass over it. Because when I create edition E1, I will automatically see everything that's in E0. If I try to run a statement in E0 or in edition 1, the next edition, and I haven't created any new editions of any of the objects, I'll get the exact same behavior that I had if I connected to E0. But as soon as I create a new editioned object in E1, effectively what I'm doing is painting that object on top of the glass. And now my picture of that schema shows all the old objects and this new one, and I don't see the old version of that object when I'm connected into that edition. So just understanding this concept of an edition and the fact that there are additionable objects, I'm going to say right now, you could do more with edition-based redefinition. You could say, hey, I'd like our development team to be able to have a brand new version of the database that I create instantaneously, where they can try out changes to any of these 11 different objects. They can create new views, new synonyms, procedures, functions, package, etc. And as long as they're connected into there, anything that they do or run is going to use that new addition, and everybody else is going to see the currently running functionality in the previous edition.
Richard, could I put a question to you?
You may.
The question is, what happens when you have multiple editions in a transactional system, but now want to go live with your new edition? What happens to the transactional data that has come in when it is time to switch? For example, the transactional data that comes in on the old edition while you are vetting the new edition.
So we're gonna see how that happens very soon. So it's built into the capabilities, but in this particular case, if we've only gone this far, let's say I have a new package body in the next edition, and somebody runs they execute a procedure in there. That execution of the procedure in the next edition, we need to make sure that it puts data into the right tables and does the right stuff the way it was before, just maybe with a different business rule. So anybody using the new system is going to see the new behavior. Anybody using the old system is going to see the old behavior. But anybody that uses the new system to like create a new user, right? That rich soul user that we create, remember we said that there's a unique key on that column in the table, right? It's still going to come in, it's still going to go in there. And as somebody using the old system, if they tried to create the same thing, they've got to wait till the user in the new system either commits or rollbacks before they either get an error that username can't be used, or it succeeds after the pause. So we're going to see soon how we can add more to edition-based redefinition to do the complete scenario of that whole hop rollover stuff. Do we have any other questions at this point, Mark?
No, that's it so far.
Okay, so we have an addition. We're now going to look at the next thing, an additioning view. In the same way that previously with our additions and our additioning objects, our additionable objects, if we created a new object in the new edition, it would cover the previous object in the previous edition. An additioning view is a special kind of view. And what it does is it covers a table. So when we get to the point where we're going to introduce additioning views into our architecture, all of our existing code and all of our new code would talk to the additioning view instead of talking directly to the base table. So there's an additioning view is different than a regular view. In the past, we had regular views, and regular views, you could have instead of triggers on them, right? But you couldn't put a table trigger on a regular view, nor could you put this new third object type called a cross addition trigger on a regular view. An additioning view is a little bit different. Instead of triggers cannot exist on an additioning view, nor can cross addition triggers, and we're going to look at those at the end. But all your regular business rule table triggers can exist directly on an additioning view. There's a little asterisk there because we're going to see some of our table triggers that just maintain non-business data. Those exist on base tables. and not on auditioning views. But the regular views that we would have, or excuse me, the regular triggers that we would have that enforce business rules, those would now live on the auditioning view. So one of the things that I do when working with edition-based redefinition is I will literally go into the schema where I have these covered tables, and I will create a table named __ go away EBR in play __. Of course, you got to put double quotes around it to get the underscores in the beginning and all of that type of stuff. And because it's got double underscores, it's almost guaranteed to appear first in the tables list, because we don't want developers to write code against base tables anymore. We want developers to write code against auditioning views. Pure data triggers talk directly to tables. And what I mean by pure data triggers is stuff like this. If we had that old pre-insert trigger that maintains surrogate keys, right? Although you really should think about using identity columns or sysGUID as a default value, that would go directly on a base table. Auditing column triggers, right? The created by, updated by, that type of stuff. And then finally, cross edition triggers. We're going to talk about those as the third concept of the stuff that was introduced with edition-based redefinition. But everything else talks to auditioning views. Regular DML triggers, all your grants, all your virtual private database policies, everything that you would normally write against a table, you now write against an auditioning view. So here's a little example and a suggestion. And now Brin, in his slides, he uses a slightly different suggestion. His suggestion is add an underscore to the end of the name of the table. I actually like to add the underscore to the beginning of the table and write the table name in lowercase. And the reason is because everything will get sorted by that underscore, and I'll see immediately, oh, of all of the tables that I have, here are the ones right up front that are covered by auditioning views, and I shouldn't use them. And so if you can, do a gradual migration to auditioning views covering your base tables. You don't have to do it all at once. So in this case, let's assume this scenario. I used to have a table called T. All my SQL and PL SQL worked against table T. So the grants were there, the PL SQL packages talked to T, any views that I had, regular views, they would talk to table T. And so what I do in theoretically my last final downtime is I take table T and I rename it to _T. And then I create an auditioning view named T. Now all I have to do is recompile all my existing PL SQL and all my existing views. And all of those things now say, oh, there's an object named T at looks, operates, and functions, as far as I'm concerned, exactly like table T did. And then the auditioning view T covers that _T table. So somebody needs to mute.
Oh, Richard, while you've just stopped there momentarily, another question came in, or sorry, an observation followed by a question.
Yes.
The observation is this seems like a great strategy for moving changes to prod, as it would allow one final vetting against any changed items a dev might have forgotten to include.
Yeah. Hey, Mark.
Yeah. Got it. Okay, we'll have to ask the person who is not muted to mute themselves, please.
Okay, I think somebody is turned off mute. Mark and Ray, can you mute folks?
I can, but I don't think it's coming from the participant.
You don't think is it coming from your side, Mark?
No, I'm alone in my office.
Okay, all right. Mark Andre, is it coming from your side?
No, I'm muted.
Interesting. Well, it's definitely not coming from me. So I'm sorry, folks. I'm sorry, Mark. So say that, yes. So the
Yep.
comment about, yes, this is a great way in a production support to do that final vetting before you try to.
Against any changed items that a dev might have forgotten to include in the request without it going live to the world and causing an outage. So that's the observation.
Yep.
And the question is also, how does EBR come into play with Oracle Apex-based applications?
So I'll kind of cover that in the end, but the way to think about it is the app in our previous example, right? If we think of the app as ORDs, we can have Apex applications where the Apex application is going to automatically exist in both applications, or excuse me, in both editions. And if we have one ORDs that connects into the current run edition and another ORDs that connects into the next edition, that we're trying to mute folks and then, all right. Excellent. It sounds like we've muted the person who unmuted themselves somehow. Okay, so conceptually, I have an auditioning view named T that covers a table that used to be called T, but is now called _T. So some rules with auditioning views. Auditioning views are, remember, a brand new object type. You cannot have where clauses. So the auditioning view always selects all the rows. You cannot do expressions. So you can't take, salary times 12 to get the annual salary or anything like that. You cannot do joins. What you can do with an auditioning view is you can provide aliases. So if you had somebody who a long time ago created a table employee, right? And they were one of those people who listened to the wrong instructor at some point, and they named, instead of having first name, it was employee _ first _ name as the column names. We could do aliases. We could change that back to what it should have been in the first place. It could have just been first name. We can also do projection. And remember back from SQL class a long time ago, projection is, we can select less than the full number of columns. So if the table itself has 12 columns in it, but I want to create an auditioning view that only shows 11 of them, I can do that. And that's going to become really important. So right now, just understanding the fact that we have additions and now adding in auditioning views to cover our base tables, we can do more with edition-based redefinition. The last concept is this cross-edition trigger. Cross-edition triggers actually have two different types. They have a forward and a reverse. And the cross-edition trigger lives on the base table, which, remember, tables themselves aren't edition. You can kind of think of it as in the next edition. You should create your cross-edition triggers in the next edition. The forward cross-edition trigger goes forward from the current run edition to the next edition. And the reverse cross-edition trigger goes backwards to the old run edition. And I'm just going to give you a little example here, but using the forward and reverse cross-edition triggers, you can now hot deploy table updates. And so here, the way you spell these new triggers, right? Create trigger forward for T, before update or insert on our underscore T. Remember, that's an abomination. We hate it, but it's okay because no application code should ever talk to the base table. Only these forward and reverse cross addition triggers. For each row forward cross addition, we create triggers, these cross addition triggers, in a disabled state initially. And what I did was, in my base table, underscore T, there used to be a column called C. And C wasn't big enough. It was, let's say, for comments, right? And it was only 1,000 characters long. And it turns out that some of the CRM reps are extremely verbose, and they want 32,768 characters. So we create a new column called C wide in the base table. The auditioning view in the old system selected out C, or in the old edition selected out C. And the auditioning view in the new edition selects C wide, but aliases it as C. So now I have these two columns that contain the same information, and then you can see in the cross addition trigger, all I'm doing is I'm setting C wide to whatever it was in C. Once the trigger is created, at some point during our migration process, we actually then enable the trigger. So you don't create triggers in an enabled state when they're cross addition triggers, you create them in a disabled state. So I'm going to show you a little case study that Bryn put together, and hopefully this will bring everything together. So these again are Bryn slides used with permissions. You guys have seen first name, last name, and phone number in the sample data, right? And if anybody looks at the phone column, you'll realize that it's fundamentally broken. Somebody did not follow the rules of data normalization when they created this table, because really there are two pieces of data in the phone column. The data itself is not atomic. Because there are two pieces, there is both the country code and the actual number itself. So what we've decided we wanted to do is we wanted to move from the green to the purple. We would like to have, yeah, first name, last name, but we'd like to have a country column and a phone column, or the phone number column, right? So let's do it. Here's where we start. And remember, Bryn is just throwing the extra underscore for the base table at the end. I like it in the beginning because of sorting and all of that type of stuff. But here's what we've got. We've got a base table named employees underscore. And in it, it has a primary key, obviously. And it's got the phone column, and the dot, dot, dot is the other columns. In my currently running edition of the database over here, I've got an auditioning view called employees that is on top of the employees underscore table. And then, you know, this being Bryn, it's a smart DB application. It's also got a PL SQL procedure called maintain emps that has the logic that all our applications talk to, right? When they want to maintain emps, they insert, you know, add an employee, and that collects the right information, sends it through the employees auditioning view, and ultimately the data itself ends up in the employees table. So step one, let's create the next edition of our database. Now in this case, the employees auditioning view, it's clear, and the maintain emps package, those are clear because those again shine through. We haven't done anything yet. And if I connect into the patch edition and I try to create an employee, I'm going to run the same exact code that I did in the run edition. Now I'm going to alter the base table, and I'm going to add those two new columns that didn't exist before. I'm going to add the country column and the number column. I'm now going to, did I do two? No, just one. So I'm now going to update the employees auditioning view in the patch edition. And I'm going to say, hey, you know, primary key and all of that, but I'm not going to select out the phone column. And instead, I'm going to select out the country column and the number column. And now one can imagine that, of course, the maintain employees PL/SQL procedure that I'm adding employees through, I've got to update that so that it does the right stuff, right? It takes the data and it breaks it into those two pieces to update those two columns. I'm now going to create a forward cross-addition trigger. And remember what a forward cross-addition trigger does. It says, take anybody that uses the current run addition, run whatever logic is in it to update the new changes that I have in my base table. So here what we're going to do is we're going to write that forward cross-addition trigger such that it takes the phone number and using whatever the logic is, divides it into the country code and the actual number stuff. So remember, I just wrote it, but I wrote it in a disabled state. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire it. I'm going to fire it so that all the old phone numbers that exist populate the country column and the number column for all the employees that existed, and of course, any new employees that come in through the run addition. I'm now going to build the reverse cross addition trigger, right? And the reverse cross addition trigger says, hey, take this country column and this number column and put them into the abomination that is the phone column. Now I'm ready to go. I have my present run addition here where all the users are connected, and I have my to-be run addition. What do? I migrate all the users over. The users that used to be connected to the previous run addition, they finish their transactions. Whenever they start up another transaction, we connect them into the new run addition. Everything is good. All the new users are connected to the new run addition. So now, anytime anybody does any updates, what do? They update the country column and the number column as Dr. Codd intended, right? Now, I just take away my old objects, take away the old addition, and now I still have that phone number column. I'm going to go ahead and remove that phone number column. And now everything is as it should be. And we have gone through a table migration. And now the most important thing here is that when we did this, we did it in the context of ongoing DML, and we took 0 downtime. Brin has, in part of that 8-part series of videos, this link, if you click this link, it takes you to his specific red, green, blue demo. Back in the past when I've done this presentation, I was intending to show Brin's actual demo of him doing it, but it takes something like 40 minutes to go through his whole demo because he does it too fast at one point and then rewinds and does it again. And so anyway, I thought I'd give you guys a quick access to the actual red, green, blue demo. Effectively, what happens is this. He has a red session that's doing inserts, updates, and deletes on a table. He has a green session that's doing inserts, updates, and deletes on a table. And then in the blue, and the green is, by the way, connected into the next edition, right? And then in the blue, he actually goes through the very specific process of doing a hot rollover from the old system to the new system in the context of ongoing DML. In his presentation, he also has the syntax. How do you spell and what is the process for doing all of this? We're going to zip through these slides a little bit. I wanted to include them so that they'd be a reference for you guys. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over the code directly in these, but he does a column widening example using a replacement column paradigm, right? And so first thing that we do is we create a new edition. We add a new column to the table, right? C wide, it's a little bit wider. We build our cross edition trigger, then we enable it. And then he goes through and he does a whole bunch of things, checking for timeouts on pending DML, eventually going through and adding constraints, enable no validate, right? So that means that we can enable it, but not we don't have to worry about the fact that the old version of the table didn't have that column, and et cetera. And creating indexes, we're doing this online, creating a unique index. And remember, this is the type of stuff that pre-11.2 used to be blocking DDL and no longer is, et cetera, et cetera. We just go through all of the different steps. And when we're done, we have done a hot rollover on a production server. So, downtime, really painful, very expensive, but it is possible to eliminate the downtime, pain, and the expense by using Edition-Based Redefinition. At this point, I'm going to ask, do folks have questions?
Just waiting for those questions to come in. We have a first question.
Sure.
Do you come across many clients using it?
So no, not as many as should be, right? So Edition-Based Redefinition is one of those things that's unique in the high availability world in that it is done by developers. And so even though it's been around for 11 years, almost now, developers, I think, get too intimidated about it, or they know it's there, but don't know how to get started using it. And that's exactly why I put this presentation together. Now, in some, of course, we've done successful EBR projects with a number of our customers. Everybody that uses it, once they're using it, they love the heck out of it. And once you get this initial understanding of how it all works, it's actually really, really impressive. And remember, you don't have to go whole hog and do zero downtime patching of a production server in your first steps. You could just gradually ease yourself into it.
Okay, as a follow-up question, it is asked, is it included in all editions, XC, SC, EE, and is there a licensing cost to using it?
No licensing cost, and it is in all versions of the Oracle database. Remember, they fundamentally changed how Oracle works since 11.2 and on.
All right, and another question, is there a very simple demo or a tutorial to follow, probably less complex than Brins?
So Brins is actually pretty simple, right? It's just that it takes him a while to get through it because he has a particular way of speaking that, just it takes him a while to say things. There are definitely some blogs out there that go through some demos and simple, hey, let's just do this type of thing. Just beware that if they start talking about multiple children of a single edition, that's impossible. And if they start talking about, hey, I have 15 editions in my database, they're kind of sort of doing it wrong. So I would shy away from blogs that mention those types of things and kind kind of just take a look at some examples. But there are some nice blogs out there that walk through edition-based redefinition in a simple way. And again, Brins demo, as you might remember from that first, or the second slide of the presentation, if you just Google edition-based redefinition video training, you can download his demo and just kind of run it. So I would watch his demo and then download his demo and run it. He provided all of the code. I got him to actually stick it up there on the Oracle website so that folks could look at it.
Great. Next question is it advisable to do several EG table updates in one edition or one update at a time?
Oh, several. So if we're going to do edition-based redefinition, right? If we decide that we're going to embark on this, what I would probably do is, if I was going to do this for real in a real situation, I would have my last ever downtime. And my last ever downtime, what I would do is I would take all of my base tables, rename them, right? Create new auditioning views on top of all of those base tables that had the old base table name, do all the grants, right? The DPD policies, all of those types of things, have them talk to the new auditioning view. Because, and remember at this point, pretty much all you have to do is just recompile them because they're pointing at the name that the table used to have, but now it just points to an auditioning view. And that would be my last downtime ever. And what I would do there is I would probably just script that all out, right? And just run something that says, hey, for every table, here's a table named T, rename it to _T, create an auditioning view that selects star from _T, recompile all the code, the views, the PL/SQL packages, et cetera, that talked to the old base table. Now I don't have to update any of my code because all the code says talk to T, and now I have an auditioning view called T that's there, and now I'm done. You can, however, if you wish, do it in a piecemeal operation. Just try it out with one table and see what happens. But I would probably do all of them at once if I was going to do a edition-based redefinition exercise. And remember, only in the schemas that I was going to be doing this for. So you don't have to do it for every schema in the database, just for the ones that you're actually going to be using edition-based redefinition development process with.
Okay, and next question is, what happens when it is time to move everyone to the next edition? Do you have to change connection information, or is there an automatic option to collapse the editions?
So the editions do collapse, right? So at all existing, so remember, we should have either one or two editions, right? So first step would be all new users connect into the next edition. Any users that are currently connected into the old edition, they finish out their transactions, and then when they connect into the new edition. So effectively, all we're going to do is we're going to make the next edition become the default edition. But if you already have a connection, you're connected to the previous edition. Once you finish it out and establish a new connection, you're in. Now, the other thing that you can do is update service names on the database, right? And so remember, when the service name comes into play, is the service name comes into play when the application itself makes a connection into the database. And you connect in through the listener directs you to a service, but at that point, you already have that session established. So if we think of things like epochs, right? I could do something where I have one ords deployed that's pointing to the next edition, one ords that's pointed to the default edition. If I make the next edition, the new default edition, and then just bounce Tomcat or wherever I have ords deployed to, when it starts up again, my next edition is now the new default edition. Therefore, that ords is automatically going to have users connect in on their next request to the next edition, which has now become the only edition. Hopefully that's clear.
Okay. All right. Going on to the next question is, so you don't have to Edition enable a custom schema if you are not concerned about online patching of the schema?
Correct.
Great. And another question is, why should you use it on 12.2 and up?
Just because over the years, they added more capabilities. So remember our functional goals and our the goals that we had initially, our functional and non-functional goals, all of those were met in 11.2 for the Oracle EBS team. But EBS being as big as it is, and the database being as big as it is, once they got to the point where they could patch EBS online, live, using edition-based redefinition, they said, hey, it'd be really sweet if we could also edition public synonyms that we created. Well, that got added. I forget whether they got added in 12.1 or 12.2. Other types became additionable along the way. Extra features got added, extra capabilities got added. So it's just one of those things where everything works the best in 12.2 or higher. And then, of course, 12.2 also lets you use long object names. So you're not limited to 30 characters. And so that's my favorite feature in the 12.2 database.
All right. Next question is there a time at which any new connections automatically sent to the new edition? Do you have to do a special setup for this?
When the new edition becomes the default edition, any service name that connects into the Oracle database is just automatically going to connect into it, right? For each service name, you may optionally update it at any point to connect to any specific edition if you like.
All right. Next question. I'm thinking the zero downtime scenario of moving changes to prod here, but I'm not sure if the deleting and renaming the editions would cause downtime.
No, it does not. And the reason is because creating an edition in the database is actually just a data dictionary update. And retiring an edition is also a data dictionary update. And this is actually one of the things that works much better in 12.2 than in the first release. In the first release in 11.2 of the database, you couldn't retire old editions permanently for real, right? You could logically retire them, but physically that row would still exist in the data dictionary. And a sneaky DBA could always go back and re-enable that old edition. In 12.2 and higher, you can absolutely, most definitely retire the old edition, and it is gone and can never come back.
Okay, here's a difficult one for me. Is there a way to collapse an edition into a running edition? We have a lot of services that restart them would cause downtime. That restarting them would cause downtime.
So, so effectively, that's going to happen when we have edition E0. That's the current default edition. All those services are connected into E0, right? We create edition E1. New users are connected over there. When we retire, when we make E1 be the default edition, and then we retired the old E0, all those connections are going to now be using the default edition, which is now E1. So you don't have to bounce everything. The bounce everything was the very specific Apex ORDS case, right? Just like kind of an easy way to get stuff to work. But remember, the apps already have a connection that says, when I run my code, I am supposed to use the default edition. So if I change the default edition in the database, then that connection is using the default edition. The default edition is now changed, and now it's running the new code.
Sort of a related question also here is, based on that case, it sounds like it might be easier just to delete the edition everyone is using and rename the new edition the name of the edition you just deleted. Would that allow for a live switch out?
So no, that's not the way it works. What we do is again, we take the next edition and we make it the default edition. And those connections are now going to run code in edition E1 as if it's the default edition, because it is the default edition. Everything's cool. We don't have to do this edition rename thing, and that is not possible, by the way. You create an edition, it's named what it is when you create it, and then if you want another edition to have a new name, you just create a child of that. And then again, in 12.2 and higher especially, you can just retire the previous editions and get rid of them.
All right. Richard, I'm going to stop the questions there.
Okay.
And we're going to close the session. So once again, thank you so much, Richard, for your generosity and time and detail that you gave in this presentation. And I would like to cordially invite everyone here to our next webinar entitled Advanced Apex UI Test Automation with Cypress, and that will be presented by Senior Apex Consultant Hayden Hudson. And that'll be held Wednesday, December 11th, that's next week, at 2 p.m. And if you want to see our full webinar calendar, it's available on insum.ca. Just look under the resources section and you'll find webinars. So that's it. That concludes our presentation today. And the recording of this session will be made available to you, and the link will be sent to you. So on behalf of everyone here at Insum, I'd like to thank all of you so much for your time and hope to see you soon. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.